Was doing like one exposure like every 10 or 15 seconds, and then he put them all together like in an animation.
But for the comment.
Yeah, what did he say?
Yeah, you wouldn't want to stack for a eclipse, but I guess you could.
So he used his, for the comet, he used his ASI 178 camera with a 28 millimeter f3.5 lens, and he had it on a barn door tracker, so I don't know what the total exposure was. He built a homemade barn door tracker that's motorized, so. Alright, well, we'll give everybody 1 or 2 more minutes.
Did he say whether he was going to come to the club more frequently?
I think he's planning on it, but he's also in the process of helping Gwen's brother sort of liquidate some stuff at the house, and they're trying to get the house ready to sell, and then the other home that he owned in St. Mary's, I guess he's going to move out there.
Well, he's building a little observatory out there.
Well, it's already, the house he bought already has a dome up on oh good grief, it's probably,
Kind of tower set up.
yeah, it's probably 30 or 40 feet off the ground.
I remember him telling me about that.
Yeah. But it needs some work too. So, but you know, his plans with that were always to put a telescope in there and control it remotely, so he wasn't having to go up and down into the dome. But I guess he's going to make that happen now. But he's just kind of busy right now with everything after Gwen passing away. Her brother's in from Ireland, and they're trying to get everything squared away with the state. So
he's a widow now, huh?
yes. Well, I don't think they were ever officially married.
Oh.
They were just together for, a long time. Yep. So they're trying to figure out what everybody wants to keep, and then, just like anybody else that has to go through that, figure out what everybody wants, and then, probably have like an estate sale or something after that, and then sell the house. I guess they had some work they had to do on the house first.
Yeah.
So, all right, well, let's go ahead and get started. And in typical forgetful fashion, I left home today without bringing my 2 smart telescopes to just show as display. They're being delivered while we talk, and we can use them later on, but I'll at least show you which ones they are. And for some reason, my audio, I don't think, is working on this, because we were supposed to be listening to the Beatles' Revolution, but that was just to lead into the title of the presentation and talk a little bit about this new category of telescopes that have really, are starting to sort of revolutionize amateur astronomy, and it's a really new category of telescopes. The first ones were only introduced 5 years ago, and there's been a lot of changes since then. So we can talk a little bit, though, about the history, and know this grid path on this collection of history books is not related to Ian Ridpath, who's an astronomical author. But if we go way back to the good old days,
I remember Scott
many of us, you know, were doing astronomy back in the good old days. You know, there were no electronics really on telescopes. If you were lucky enough to have a telescope that had a synchronous motor where you could actually track things, you were doing pretty good. But for the most part, you looked at sky charts and you looked through your finder scope and you just pushed your telescope around until you found the objects that you were looking for. Generally, you do, you know, like a star hop on your map where you go from bright star to bright star until you get to the location that you were trying to arrive at. And then things got really fancy. There was NGC Max, there was a unit called SkyScan, several electronic digital setting circles. So telescopes have traditionally always had setting circles so that you could use those to help point the telescope. But what you would do here is key in the item or the coordinates that you were trying to get to, and then you would physically push the telescope until it read that you were pointing in the correct direction. And this concept has actually been updated with this StarSense telescopes from Celestron, where you actually use your smartphone sort of as the finder. You mount it, you get it aligned, and then you pick the object on your phone and you push the telescope until it says that you're there. It takes a little while to get those things aligned correctly with the telescope, but they do work once you get it done. So then we went to go-to telescopes where you could actually you know, punch in the object you were looking for and the telescope would take you there. But that was after doing a lot of alignment work at the beginning up front, where you'd have to find multiple stars, tell the telescope what you had pointed it to, and then the telescope would figure out you know, where you were. You also had to put in your location, latitude, longitude, the date and the time and all that. So there was a lot of data entry that you had to put in at the beginning to get these to work, but they definitely worked once you did all that, if you did it correctly. And then, of course, more recently, some of these computerized telescopes that have GPS built in, so the days of necessarily having to enter all that data up front, you may still have to do a one-star alignment with some of them, depending upon the software, but they do a lot of that. The GPS does a lot of that work after the fact, and or before, as you're going through doing this. The same sort of revolution has been taking place, as some of you are well aware, in the imaging side of the spectrum, where, you know, we started out with black and white, you know, film, moved up to, well, actually before that, we had glass plates that they took images on. We used black and white film, real fast film. Then we changed over to color film. Then there was a period of time where people were doing, you know, using like security camera-based video setups, where they would take those frames off of the video and stack those. And now we've got, you know, the CCD imaging So a similar sort of a progression has happened on the imaging side. But what smart telescopes have done is kind of combine that imaging and the computerized telescope into one unit. So what exactly is a smart telescope? Well, it's multiple things wrapped up into one. It's a telescope that has an imaging system built into it. They have advanced go-to and tracking capabilities. They have very good connectivity. In fact, almost all of them are run from a smartphone or a tablet, separate from the actual telescope. They all have software or apps that you can download onto your smartphone or tablet. They do some artificial intelligence. Most of them use plate solving, where it'll take images at the start of your run of like 2 or 3 areas of the sky. It'll recognize the stars in those images and know from that where you are. It also connects to your GPS on your phone or tablet, and then it uses Bluetooth and/or Wi-Fi to connect with your phone. It'll also do some image processing for you. It'll stack all the images as they're going. A little bit like some of what the more advanced video cameras would do as that technology moved forward. But this is all in one integrated package. And as you'll see as we kind of go through some of these, the size of that integrated package can vary widely. The price of that integrated package can vary wildly as well. So what was my initial reaction? Well, and this applies, I think, to many of those steps in the sort of telescope evolution that we looked at. That's cheap. Bah humbug. It's the old thing. If I had to learn to do it the hard way, then everybody else needs to learn to do it the hard way too. But, as you stop and think about it, thankfully we have a couple of younger folks here, but, the amateur astronomy community is aging. And there's not a lot of younger folks, joining up. And, I think we all know, all you have to do is go to downtown Lawrence and sit in a restaurant and watch all the, the 20-year-olds and 30-year-olds and 40-year-olds and 50, everybody's sitting there on their phone. They're glued to their phone all the time. And so what better way to connect people with amateur astronomy than through something that they're already doing. And it's hard to learn. It's hard to learn the night sky. It's a lot of people buy telescopes, realize how hard it is to learn how to use them and to find things with them in the night sky. And a lot of telescopes sit in closets or basements and collect dust. So, some of that's just too much for a lot of people. So, the thing that I've sort of decided is that if this is a way to get more people interested in astronomy, then I'm all for it. I've always been interested in astrophotography, but I've never spent the money to buy, a telescope and, the camera and the software to manipulate those images and everything, because I grew up as an optical a visual observer. But this is a great way for someone like me to get into astrophotography without, I'm not gonna ask you, Parker, how much you spent on all of your rigs for photography, but, yes, exactly. The answer is a lot. So if there's a way that you can do that without having to spend all that money, and I will say, the quality of the images that come from these telescopes isn't the same as what comes from, several $1,000 telescope and close to $1,000 camera and the software and everything else, the mount and everything else that you need to do photography. But, it's still a way to sort of kick down the door. So, what are the advantages? Well, a lot of it, you don't have to enter the basic data, such as the date, time, and location repeatedly, because it'll pick that up from your phone or tablet. It's basically simple alignment. It's very precise, and the go-to seems to work really well with just about all these telescopes. The apps are a couple of them were a little clunky at the start, but they're getting more user-friendly as they update them. The photos are generally automatically stored on the camera. A couple of the telescopes, they'll store the photos on your device. It just depends on the telescope. They're compact and portable. You don't have a lot of, one thing that astrophotographers will tell you is that cable management is a big deal. There's lots and lots of wires that have to connect everything together. With these, there's basically no wires. They have rechargeable batteries. A couple of them actually have removable batteries too, so you can carry multiple charged batteries. Some of them will allow you to recharge the battery while it's being used. They're all just a little bit different there. They're easy to transport because they do work really well they do work in city conditions, in light polluted conditions. I've used mine a lot just for my front yard, and I have one of those new LED streetlights across the street that's like the sun at night. It's so bright. But they do work well, but they work even better if you can take them out away from light pollution. And they're easy to transport because you don't have all the, heavy mounts and tripods and everything else. Most of them offer the ability to have multiple users watching at the same time. Unistellar allows 10 separate smart devices to connect at the same time, so that's real convenient for large groups. Some, like the Dwarf, only allow 2 other devices to connect, but they do allow that. You can share your photos directly on social media, or you can take them and do post-processing on a PC like you would a regular astrophoto. They do work really well in areas with light pollution. Just as long as you can sort of control the glare from any local lights, then you can see a lot of things that you could never see any other way. I've imaged the Horsehead Nebula from my front yard with one of these telescopes, so it's pretty amazing the things you can see. And like I said earlier, it's a great way to sort of dip your toes into astrophotography without the big outlay. If you want to get the really, really high quality imaging, you can always take that next step. And one of the newer features on some of these now, with updates to the apps and everything, is that they actually have interactive sky maps in the app now. So you can, if you don't even know what you want to look at, you can sort of point the, just like a Star Atlas app that you would get for your phone, you can point your phone up at the night sky and zoom in, and it'll identify objects that are visible, and you can just tap on one of those objects and then hit go to, and the telescope will take you right there. So that makes it even easier for people just getting started. Well, I mean, it makes it easier for me too, you know, rather than having to go through a finder scope and try and find something in a regular telescope. So this is sort of a timeline of the history, and like I said, it's a short history, but it's a kind of a busy history. And there have been a lot of new telescopes released. In fact, everything on there that has an asterisk next to it is no longer being produced because they've released a new version. And some of those new versions literally have come, you know, a year after the previous version was released. But the very first one was in 2019 from a company called Vaonis, and it was their Stellina. They still make the Stellina, but the manufacturer is out of stock right now on some of the hardware that they need to put it together. So if you were to buy a Stellina, you would have to buy one from a retailer who still had inventory. Vaonis isn't selling them right now, but they have continued to say that they'll have them back in stock sometime soon. Then in 2020, a company called Unistellar joined the fray, and they had the EV scope and the Equinox, and those have both been updated now. So there's an Equinox 2 and EV scope 2. Vaonis came out with their Vespera in 2021, and then DwarfLabs came out with their first telescope. It was called Tiny Scope, and it was, what they tried to do is produce a piece of equipment that you could use for both a telescope and a microscope. And it was not as successful as their second edition, which came out in 2023, the Dwarf 2, which is one of the ones that I have. And then they updated the EV scope and the Equinox. The Vespera Passengers was a limited release offering. They only make 220 of them. It's just an updated Vespera. But then they followed that up this year with 2 new Vesperas, the Vespera 2 and the Vespera Pro. But the 2 that really have sort of kick-started this whole thing because of the price points are the Dwarf 2 and the ZWO C-Star. Because both of those retailed at $500 or less. And as we'll see when we look at a comparison of all these, they can get significantly more expensive than that. So that was a great starting point, especially for the solar eclipse earlier this year. Lots of Dwarfs and C-Stars were sold. I think KU actually bought for the department, they actually bought a C-Star. So they have one as well. the Unistellar EV scope, which was their first release. I've actually gotten to use one of those. The Girl Scout camp in Tonganaxie has one that they have available to the troops when they come out there and camp, and I've had a chance to use that. So the Vaonis Hestia is actually, it's not really a telescope as much as it is an optical system that you use directly with the camera of your phone. So you can adjust based on where your camera is on the front of your phone. It has little clamps that will hold your phone in place once you center it on that. And then there's an optical system inside the unit. So it doesn't track, it doesn't have go-to or anything like that, but it does sort of supplement with a nice optical system your phone camera. And Unistellar came out with their Odyssey and Odyssey Pro, and Dwarf 3 just got released this year. The Odyssey Pro and Odyssey came out this year. The Vesper 2 and Vesper Pro both came out this year. And then Celestron is just getting into this. They're just starting to, I don't think they've actually shipped any yet, but they're getting real close to shipping their entry into this category, and they call it the Celestron Origin.
And doesn't that one have larger optics than all those other ones?
Well, it has larger optics than most of the other ones. There is one other one that has larger optics, but it's significantly more expensive. So, but yes, it's a little bit larger optics. So, talk a little bit about the players, and so this Hyperia from Vaonis is it's literally, it's like an observatory class smart telescope, so it's extremely expensive. The Vesper 2 and Vesper Pro all use the same shell, but they have different electronics. The Stellina, and then the Hestia is the one that actually is just the optical system for that adds to your phone camera. Unistellar, so the EV scope was the very first one, and then they followed that up with the Equinox, and then they're both in the second version of those, and then the Odyssey. There's also an Odyssey Pro that looks the same. And then DwarfLabs, so the Dwarf 2 was the one that was good until just now, and literally the first Dwarf 3s are just getting into the hands of people who ordered them from the original Kickstarter program. So they're just now starting to ship, but the Dwarf 2s are no longer shipping. And it's a little bit larger unit, a little bit better, a little more aperture, but it also has some other things that have changed from the Dwarf 2 that I don't like as much, actually. So, and then ZWO with the C-Star, it's a little bit for the lower end of the price range for smart telescopes. It's a little bit bulkier unit than some of the others, but it seems to work real well. We had when we were down over in Missouri for the eclipse, the night before the eclipse, we were parked right next to a guy from Colorado who was in for the eclipse, and he had just bought a C-Star and had never even used it yet. He was a photographer from Colorado. So we helped him set it up in the lawn in front of the hotel and played around with it a little bit just to see how it worked. And we got some nice images off of that as well. For having the same Price point basically is the Dwarf. The one big advantage to the C-Star is that it's actually a 50 millimeter apochromatic system. So the image quality is a little bit better from the optical system, but it lacks in a few other things. And then the Celestron Origin, which looks a lot like a Celestron telescope, but is their entry into the smart telescope. There's a couple other that you might see, particularly on Amazon, for example. One's called DwarfLabs, and literally I've seen nothing but bad reviews on these. They're a little on the low price side, so I think that might be what attracts people to them. But the last I heard is that even though the company website is still up and they're still being offered on Amazon, that they haven't actually shipped any product for several months. So there's a question as to whether or not they're actually still in business. And then the other one is called Mirosky, and this is one that was a Kickstarter program in 2018 that was supposed to ship in 2021, and they haven't shipped. They have everybody's money, but they haven't shipped a single unit yet. So another one to beware of. So I know this is sort of an eye chart, so I'm not expecting everybody to see it, but as you can see, or as you may not be able to see, but I can tell you, if you rank them by aperture, the Dwarf 2 is the smallest. It's a 24 millimeter aperture, and the Celestron Origin is the largest. It's 152 millimeter aperture. So none of them are huge, but they are varying degrees of size. And the main difference, though, I think, quality-wise, is the image sensor that they're using. They're all using Sony IMX sensors, but they're using different sensors in each one. And so sometimes some of the smaller ones are using higher grade imaging sensors, and that makes up a little bit for the smaller aperture. And then, they all have varying things. Some of them can do mosaic. All of the Vaonis telescopes can do mosaic mode. The C-Star has that coming purportedly, but isn't available yet. The Dwarf 3 has a mosaic mode, and then the Celestron Origin is also saying that they will have that ability later. So as you can, again, maybe not see, but I can point it out to you, the prices run from a low of $399 for the Hestia, which is the optical system that uses your camera on your phone, up to, for the Hyteria, that observatory class item, which is only 150 millimeter aperture, so it's about the same as the Celestron Origin, but it sells for $45,000. They haven't shipped a lot of those. They've shipped a few, but they haven't shipped a lot of those. But I think they set the market, the market roof, and everybody else is going to be under that. Now, I think one of the things that I've noticed, for the most part, once you get past those $500 offerings like the Dwarf and the C-Star, it kind of starts at about $1,500 and goes up to about $5,000, depending upon which unit you're looking at. What I have seen is that while they're not, when these new models are coming out with better features, better optics, better imaging sensors, the prices really aren't going up. So rather than the prices coming down, as they do the new releases, they're releasing them with very little increase in price. So, but I think now that Celestron has jumped in, and they're sort of at that $4,000 level, so they're close to the top. I think you may see some of these companies, because as you can tell, it's become a kind of a crowded field in a short 5-year period, and I don't think that that's going to subside anytime soon. So I think you might start seeing the pricing become a little bit more competitive. We'll see. Other considerations, so we talked about Vaonis already having the mosaic mode available on their telescopes. They call it Covalens, that you can see down there at the bottom. And that's supposed to work real well. It doesn't come with the Hestia because that doesn't actually have the imaging as part of it, just the optical system. So it's only on their actual smart telescopes. Unistellar has the ability to connect your observations to a couple of different citizen science projects, so you can actually do imaging and submit that, on your phone or tablet directly to those citizen science projects. So you can actually do real science with those. At this point, they're the only ones that actually have a direct link in their software to those citizen science projects. Some of these telescopes are meant specifically for nighttime viewing. Some of these telescopes, though, are just as effective using during the day to take daytime imaging and observations. So that's something to keep in mind. The ease of using the apps varies from one manufacturer to another. The C-Star, to me, just watching this other guy set his up and using it a little bit, seemed, I've worked with the app on Unistellar, and I've worked with the app on the DwarfLab, and I've seen somebody else doing the app on C-Star. And the C-Star looked to me like it was maybe the easiest to get started on. The DwarfLab app, while they've updated it a number of times to make it a little bit easier, it still has a few extra steps and things you have to get used to. They're all a little bit different. Like I said, many of them are now adding the Star Atlas feature to their apps. I know on the DwarfLab, it doesn't give, it doesn't tell you where their atlas came from, but it looks a lot like Stellarium to me. So they may have some arrangement with that manufacturer. The portability, some of those, as you can tell by looking at the pictures on some of those telescopes, they get bigger. And I mean, if we go back and just look at the weight, they go in pounds anywhere from 2 pounds for the Hestia, 2.9 for the Dwarf, up to 42 pounds for the Celestron. So the portability factor varies from telescope to telescope. Obviously, a 3-pound Dwarf telescope is going to be a lot more portable than a 42-pound Celestron telescope. And expense, obviously. Unistellar does on a couple of their, so we saw like the Odyssey and the Odyssey Pro. If you're wondering what the difference between those, the Odyssey Pro has an actual eyepiece that you can look into, but I've given that an asterisk because it's not, you're still not really looking at the live image of that object through an eyepiece. What you're looking at is you're looking into an eyepiece at a little tiny video screen that's basically showing you, a thumbnail of what you would see on your tablet. So you're not really looking at it, you're still looking at an electronic image. None of them are very good for planetary observing. So right there is an image of Saturn, and I think that was through one of the Vaonis telescopes. But because none of these are really, they're all primarily made to image deep sky objects, with larger fields of view, really fast focal ratios, and so they don't have the focal ratio, the focal length, or the ability to magnify well enough to really get any kind of decent images of the planets. They do really good job on the moon and the sun, but the planets not so much. I can view Jupiter on mine, but the planet itself is overexposed if I want to see the 4 Galilean moons. So they're just not really made for planetary observing. And because of the other nice thing is, because of the fact that new models are coming out on a pretty regular basis at this point, there is becoming a little bit more of a second-hand market for, like I know some people that are trying to sell Dwarf 2s because they ordered their Dwarf 3 and they don't need both of them, so they're going to keep the 3 and sell the 2. So there is a little bit of a second-hand market developing for some of these. Again, most of these haven't really been around for long enough that there's a huge second-hand market, but it's getting better. And then I just thought I would show a few images from some of the different telescopes. So these are a couple of images from some Vaonis telescopes. I believe these might all actually I think that might be a Stellina image, but I think both of these are Vespera. One of the features that some of these telescopes will let you do is, let me see here if I got, so like Unistellar, you can do in the settings, you can change it so that the images actually have this circular border around it that not only brag their name, but tells you what that's an image of and the date that you took it and all that. It keeps that information attached to the image. So that's, you can turn that off, but I know a lot of people keep that on just so it's easier to remember what it is they were looking at. C-Star, so again, C-Star offers the ability to tag your photos with the name of the object that you were looking at. Dwarf, so there's a Saturn image for the Dwarf. So again, they're not great on long exposure photographs, but like I said earlier, a lot of these will pick up objects even from a little bit of a light polluted area like the Veil Nebula that you wouldn't normally be able to see otherwise. And then these are official pre-release images from Celestron, so I'm sure they've been manipulated significantly to make them look very good, so people will spend $4,000 to order one. But again, they all tag their images with details about the object and the date that you took it, and the exposure length and all that. And then these are just some of the images that I've taken, and I know some of these probably aren't going to show up great on the screen here, but the Orion Nebula had some tracking issues going on. You can see some dragging on the stars there. Get some of the nebulosity around the Pleiades. The M87 group of galaxies up there. The moon. This was our comet earlier this year. The Swan Nebula, I think actually you took that one. And the Lagoon Nebula, I think we took that right outside here a few weeks ago. And then, like I said, they do take pretty good images of the sun and the moon. This was actually, I did with my Dwarf, I did a full video from the very beginning of the total solar eclipse to the very end of the total solar eclipse. And then I just pulled screenshots out of that to sort of make that image on the right. And this is, this is one where I went right into the kind of heart of the Virgo galaxy cluster. This is Marcanian's chain, which is this group right here, which is pretty faint in a telescope. 3 or 4 of those are easier to see than the others, but everything circled on this image is actually a galaxy from the Virgo cluster that was visible. So that's pretty impressive for a smart telescope with a 24 millimeter aperture, I think, anyway. So what's next? So I think there's, as fast as they're coming out with new models and as often as they're updating software, several of these companies in the apps, I think we're definitely going to see some more brands enter the market because, really, with the entry of Celestron now, we have 4 companies doing this. And there's going to be more than 4 companies at the end of it. They're going to continue to keep updating both the firmware that operates the telescopes and the software in the apps. What I'm hoping for is that, I'm hoping that the prices start coming down over time, but what I'm hoping for is, we have these awesome computerized telescopes in pretty large sizes, that are fairly expensive, yes, but what I foresee is that, you can get like a 8-inch or a 10-inch or an 11-inch SCT style telescope that has this same capability of doing the plate solving and finding its location without entering any data and doing the image stacking with image software. And I don't know if it's going to end up being something like, you know, the old original Macs, you know, where you could flip from using an eyepiece to, you know, using a camera to image by just flipping a little switch at the rear cell. I don't know what it's going to end up looking like, but boy, wouldn't it be nice if you take some of the imaging capabilities and the tracking and go-to capabilities of some of these smart telescopes and sort of, you know, put that in with the high-end telescopes that are available now. Yes?
Actually, it has some of those capabilities now in the ZWO-ASI Air, which is basically a little Raspberry Pi that you attach to your telescope, and it will very easily do your polar alignment. It will, you know, dead on go to. You can monitor it on your phone or your tablet. If you want, it will do your stacking for you and all of that, but you're still operating through the telescope itself.
Right.
So if you wanted, you could do the visual stuff, but it has that front end capability.
Is that the
certainly
system?
saves a lot of grief.
Is that the system you're using when you do like solar imaging?
No,
No, okay.
no, on that, I just hooked up my, I have a dedicated ZWO camera that I put on the Lunt hydrogen alpha, which does a nice job of tracking, and then I just stack it in the normal way using SharpCat.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I can see, you know, I think the path has been a little divergent, traditional telescopes and the smart telescopes, but I can foresee those two paths coming closer together down the road because, you know, it makes them a lot easier to use. And I think that's the key takeaway from what's going on with smart telescopes is that they really are, there might be a little bit of a learning curve with the apps to get started, but they are way easier to get started with than, for example, you know, going out and not that those computerized telescopes are that easy to use. Some of those are fairly complicated to use as well. But there has to be a way that you can make viewing the night sky and imaging the night sky more accessible for more people. And you know, the one thing I didn't mention, I kind of touched on it a little bit, but to me, this has been awesome when I'm doing outreach because, you know, rather than having people lining up at the telescope to get it turned to look through the eyepiece, which is great. I still think they should be doing that too. But it's nice to just be able to have something on a tablet that multiple people can stand around. And, you know, theoretically, I could project it up onto a screen inside the building if people were in here, you know, to watch it build an image in real time as well. So it is a great boon, I think, to the outreach piece, in addition to just being able to use it for fun. And that's it. I hope Brian got it. And I've, like I mentioned at the beginning, I neglected to bring my smart telescopes with me, but They should be here by now, and, well, we'll just go look and see if he's here.
What do you have besides the Dwarf?
So I've got the Hestia, which is the one that you just put your phone on, and it's sort of an advanced optical system that works in conjunction with the phone on your, or the camera on your phone.